Hello everyone, once again I returned to talk about species and characters, and all the stuff that you probably know exclusively because I find new ways to talk about it all the time. Today I return to the topic of closed species. This is meant to be a bit of an update to my old video, as I mentioned in my last video, since I felt like more information could have been included. In my original video, I exclusively made out closed species to be bad, which at the time was my intention. Floating myself in an exclusively criticized part of the community gave me only negative impressions towards certain things. Closed species were one of the biggest instances of me only getting a negative impression rather than seeing a lot of the good that could come with making or using one. I decided to include some of the benefits to a closed species as not to make it out as something that should never be supported. If you do not know, a closed species is a custom-made species that is usually made as some kind of brand new species, usually based on a currently existing species. A majority of them are based on feral animals, but that's just a pattern I noticed. Rather than being widely available to the public, the creators make them closed, meaning that no one can freely make a character of the species. The characters can only be obtained by either adopts or something known as an MYO, which means make your own. Typically, MYOs are given through slots and are paid with money, and adopts are always purchased through money. MYOs allow people to design their own character for the species, but they must follow a strict guideline of rules for the species' attributes. If any of the rules are broken, a person is usually blacklisted from the species, or publicly put on a list in quite a few instances in larger species groups, and they are thereby unable to make or distribute the species anymore, ever again. Even if they attempt to apologize to the group, they will usually refuse to let them return. Some of these rules can include making an invalid character, being rude to members or staff, or not paying for an adopter MYO. Basically what this means is that a closed species is a custom species that is unavailable to the public unless you pay money to get the character. Failure to abide by these rules commonly leads to being blacklisted, sometimes publicly. You may have noticed a few problems from the start, specifically around the public blacklist part. What does this mean exactly? A blacklist acts as a list of people who are unable to get access to the species, usually so that a creator or its moderators can refer to the list and stop anyone who is blacklisted from attempting to use the species in any way. Sometimes a blacklist is made public, usually so that other members are able to refer to the list and prevent people on the list from using the species. Basically, the mods are too lazy to do their job. A species creator or its mods will typically put people on a blacklist if they break certain rules of a species. Almost every example I've seen of a species' rules are that they are not directly visible on the front page, and instead you must scroll through their page trying to find the journal square containing the rules. In some cases, the title might be filled with the species name or whatever, and then the word rules is at the end, where it is not easily visible. This means it can be difficult for newcomers, especially to find the rules, making them more likely to be broken. Some examples of species rules I have gathered are here. Commercial monetary use of the species must be brought up with the species creator before doing or attempting. You may not resell characters given as a gift or for a character trade, the exchange of two characters between artists. MYO slots cannot be resold. Several master list rules, some being that only the owner is allowed on the master list and no one else. Don't sell the character for more than the worth, which is based on the amount of art that they have, which I suppose increases worth based on the artist or their style. Not sure on all that, doesn't really make much sense. Characters cannot look exactly like existing designs. You can only change the character designs even mildly once a month, excluding clothes. Don't copy the species design. Time to advertise my last video. When bidding, do not backcharge. I'm not really sure what this means. All payments must be made with USD, United States dollars. If you do not pay for the character within a certain time frame, and depending on the reason, you'll receive a strike. 3 strikes and you get banned. Do not post unapproved or pending approval characters publicly. Your account must be a few months old to participate. You cannot commission for MYO designs. You may not sell these characters for actual money. Only slight alterations can be made to the character, mostly being based on the species guide, and lastly, Failure to abide by these rules more than 3 times results in a permanent ban from the entire species. Most of these rules are about making an invalid design for the species. What is considered to be valid in a closed species is when the design has been personally approved by the creator. This includes adopts and rare resold MYO slots. Official designs are automatically approved, and quite a few species creators will only allow themselves to make adopts and no one else. An unapproved design would be one that was created and has not yet been approved by the creator. A pending approval design is one that has been submitted by the species creator to be approved. Basically, in order to make an official character, you must follow closely strict rules and then submit the character to be approved. If the character is not approved, it is considered invalid. An invalid character can be taken from the rightful owner and resold by the creator to someone else. Either that or the character cannot be used at all. Closed species owners basically automatically claim the copyright to your character if you create one, even though most characters are paid for in the species. MYO slots are paid before a character is designed, and so the owner does in fact officially own the character before it is designed. Revoking the design because it is invalid even though the person has paid the MYO price is likely illegal in a manner of speaking. If you think about it, that's like a store employee trying to take back the food you just paid for, not giving you a refund, telling you the food is invalid because it's expired or something. A store making you pay for something you break makes sense, as the product you've basically gotten ownership is signed to you. As by breaking a product, you've basically gotten the ownership signed to you. Paying to compensate for the damage then hands ownership of the item to you, whether you want it or not. A species making you pay for design, then revoking it if you've broken one of the many rules without refund is basically the opposite of doing this. They illegally take access to a character back. If the character was a gift in any way, then it's totally fine for the creator to revoke it, as no legal exchange was technically made. It's like calling a request a commission. It's just not. Giving money to someone in exchange for a product is a fair trade, a legal exchange. Giving someone a design without the other party getting any gain from it besides the satisfaction of seeing a happy face is not fair on the other person's side. In this case, the other person would be justified in taking the design back if they wanted it. It may disappoint the new owner a lot, but they didn't pay for it, so too bad for them. Too long didn't read. Paying for design makes it yours. It cannot legally be taken back without a refund of any kind. Species owners doing it may be according to their TOS, but it's not technically okay from a legal standpoint. You have a right to ask for a refund or keep the character, and if they attempt to take it back, then report them in any way. Maybe not to the police, but at least for character theft or art theft or something. Creating a character from an MYO slot may not be all sunshine and rainbows either. Let's say you've read the rules and looked at the species guide top to bottom. You know exactly what you're doing. Let's fake up a species for a second as an example. Hopefully the species does not actually exist and I'm unintentionally plagiarizing them. Here's what it looks like, called Vexitites. Pretty simple design, just a simple degrade with some added features. Something extremely important that is required in a species is a defining trait. Something that makes them distinct from one another. For example, the distinct feature of a Cinedog is the large curly tail, typically with the appearance of a cinnamon roll or pastry. The defining feature of a Vexitite is clearly the 2 giant claws that come out from its body, I suppose to act like some kind of weapon. This feature is absolutely required for the species to be a species. Without it, it's just your average anthro character. It's understandable that the defining characteristic of a species, whether a water pattern or a distinctive face or pattern, would be required in order to make a character part of the species. Other features such as the eyes and the dress-like fur they have can make them distinctive as well. These features are less distinct, as you may occasionally see them on a normal anthro character. This would be a good feature to make a more uncommon customizable trait, since it is still a bit of a distinctive trait for the species. A feature such as tail length, finger shape, ear shape, or nose type can be a lot less distinctive for a species. Any anthro character would be able to have a long tail or sharp claws for fingers. It's a lot more common. A good idea would be to make those features more common as opposed to uncommon, unless it directly affects how the creature lives according to its lore. for example a herbivore species having claws. Making indistinctive traits, such as what I mentioned, a more rare trait that requires a more expensive MYO slot or more money to buy as an adopt is usually a bad idea. More people are likely just to make their own character that copies the distinctive traits with the rare traits that they were unable to get. Otherwise, people are less likely to get the rare trait and just make up some way to fit the trait in, thus likely making the character invalid. This is obviously a bad strategy for bringing up a species, since people will be less likely or unable to engage with the species. Some species creators insist on certain undefining traits being rare or legendary, such as, once again, the attributes that I described earlier. Patterns should usually not be restricted unless it's a defining trait of the character, such as a certain emblem that distinguishes them from your average creature. Legendary traits should not be stuff that isn't extraordinarily special, such as a portal to the void of space itself and its fur or something. That stuff is a bit too extreme for a creature, especially if the rest of the species doesn't have that level of magic to them. People who restrict stuff like this are usually doomed for their species to be unsuccessful, hence why most popular species don't try to restrict a lot of traits. If a species restricts something like different length for a tail or a different eye shape, don't go for those traits. It's not worth spending your money to essentially change the character's personality. Also, do not get traits that have anything to do with character color. That is just scraping the bottom of the barrel. A trait for an MYO that is actually worth getting would be stuff that both allows for creative freedom and has something to do with the distinctive traits of the species. Otherwise, don't bother with the rest, just stick with common stuff, which is usually the free stuff. There's not much to add to this section, as most closed species manage this part pretty well. If you've done just about everything right with an MYO and have followed all the rules, then you can finally gain access to a valid character. A valid character is usually put on a master list, which is a list of all valid characters in the species. Characters can be removed from master lists, especially when someone is moved to the blacklist. What's probably most confusing about a master list is how it works. A big species would likely have thousands of characters, so it must be hard to keep track of all of them, right? New characters are made, old ones are exchanged, probably daily. A closed species will make it quite clear that the master list must be fixed when something about a character has changed. Like, they include this detail multiple times in the rules, and it's in every species' rules I've seen so far. I suppose people just want to flex how much support their creation is getting. Lucky you, I guess. When a character is redesigned from a closed species, from what I've seen, it doesn't need to be re-verified. It would make sense that it does, since maybe an invalid attribute was added to the redesign, though I haven't seen any part in the rules that I've read. They know exactly what to include in the rules apparently. Emphasize the master list, but forget about redesigning. I assume it's the same procedure from an original validation process if a character happens with the redesign, and if it's invalid, it can't be used. Then, of course, there's handing a character over to someone else, usually through an adopt. Pretty much like if you're commissioning someone for artwork. You pay the person, they give you the valid character, and now you have an automatically valid character. I personally wouldn't get an adopt just in case it is invalidated, but usually I wouldn't get them because they can be incredibly expensive, and sometimes I'm not really a fan of the designs they make. Hybrids are probably the worst type of closed species that exist. The only exception for the following rant I'm about to give about hybrids could be if you combine two species that you own and make them a hybrid species. Otherwise, get ready for my complaining because I have quite a lot to say. Let's start with explaining what they are. Hybrids are combinations of two or more, but typically two, animals or species that are then put up as one species as if they were completely original. A greatly popular example of this is a kitty dog, an open species. A kitty dog, as you may be able to tell, is a hybrid of a cat and a dog. They are typically anthro with ears of both a cat and a dog combined. It is quite a distinguishable species because of the combination of features. The reason a species like this is likely open is because not only are dogs and cats some of the most commonly used animals for characters, but they're also hybrids of real-life creatures. Any person could make a dog with cat ears, any person could make a cat with dog ears. It's distinguishable, but it's not a closed species because it's not unique enough to check the closed species boxes. Some people, for whatever reason, decide making a hybrid species of either two real animals, a real animal and a made-up species, or a made-up species with another, is a great idea for a closed species. I am not joking. People make hybrid species closed. It is fine if your species takes certain characteristics from a pre-existing species. Obviously, who's gonna stop you? Using defining attributes of a species, such as feathers of a peacock, and combining that with another attribute, such as antlers on a deer, are what would be considered a hybrid. Also, that sounds like a terrible combination of traits, just saying. Now, why is a hybrid as a close species, a species that is unavailable to the general public, a terrible idea? First of all, take a freaking guess. Starting off with a hybrid of two existing animals is just a humongous risk for hatred of a species. If people make a hybrid of two animals for your typical character, not just for a species, just a character, then there is a chance people will mistake the character for being part of the species. This is then followed by mountains of harassment towards the character for having attributes of two existing species that people mistake for being original to the hybrid species. Anyone can make a hybrid creature of two animals. People do it all the time. I do it all the time. Moving on to a combination of a real species and a made-up species, this one mostly depends on who owns the made-up species. If you are the owner of both the made-up species and the hybrid species, that would probably make for some interesting lore. Maybe the species has an ability to take the shape or form of a pre-existing animal. That'd actually make for a great species concept. Hope you guys don't mind if I use that one. The real problem, though, is if the hybrid species is like a subspecies. Let's say there's the normal made-up species version, then there's the one that's mixed with a bird or something. This will most likely take away from the creative freedom of the design, saying that a subspecies with certain attributes requires a different MYO or something that could possibly be more expensive, thus giving a big chance for invalid characters. I'll get into this further a bit later. Lastly, a combination of two made-up species. Once again, it depends on who owns the species. If you and a friend want to combine species, that's totally fine. If you want to combine two of your own species, that's probably even better. But if you take one or two species that don't belong to you and combine them without the person's express permission, then that is a big problem. Especially if the hybrid is closed in any way. I feel like I probably don't have to explain the issue with this, it should be obvious. It's plagiarism, taking the defining attributes of two species and combining them, acting like it's your original creation when it's quite obviously not. Otherwise, combining species that you have permitted access to is totally fine, and it's up to the species creator what you want to do with them. A hybrid with an object such as a hand fan or a pastry or whatever is a terrible idea for closed species. Making a creature resemble food or a certain aesthetic via patterns or colors is fine, especially if it's an individual character and not the whole species. If the whole species revolves around an animal with a cinnamon roll or hand fan for a tail, that is not very creative. I will reiterate, anyone can make a dog with a cinnamon roll for a tail. Anyone can make a fox with a fan for a tail. It's not a good idea for a closed species, at least for the defining attribute of the species. Now I'll get into a closed subspecies of an open species, or vice versa. The greatest example of this that quite a few people may know of is a primogen versus a protogen. A primogen is the original version, while protogens are the subspecies of primogens. I'm glad that Malice decided to make an open counterpart of primogens, but man do they look similar as heck. Protogens and primogens both have similar defining attributes. Both have robotic masks with some kind of blade protruding from the opening. Both have some kind of armor on their hips. Both have circular screens with a symbol on them. And both have similar anatomy overall. Sure, primogens are taller and have longer snouts and an unnoticeable lack of ears, but it's really not that much of a difference. If someone has ever heard of a primogen, probably because they are closed and not open, they could mistakenly make a protogen that looks similar to the primogen. Instead of making protogens an insanely similar-looking species of primogens, a closed species, protogens could have either not existed and primogens could stay closed, or protogens could not exist and primogens become open with more variety. Or protogens are an entirely different species altogether, with different defining attributes to them. It's just so easy for someone to mistakenly make a primogen while trying to make a protogen. And more people have heard of protogens than primogens, I'm certain of that. I don't have an example for this one, but let's say you have an open species and then make a closed subspecies with it. It's pretty much the same case for primogens and protogens. It's a bad idea. A subspecies should either be the same status as the original species, or should just not exist at all. If a protogen was a different species from a primogen, not only would that be confusing, but it wouldn't change much. People could still accidentally make a primogen even if protogens are a different species. Subspecies of closed species should be closed, and subspecies of an open species should be open. Simple as that. That was a tongue twister. As I explained in my original closed species video, the general idea of a closed species is pretty fundamentally flawed. I'll use the same example that I mentioned in that video. Let's say you discover a new dog that has never been discovered by any other person ever. You start to tell everyone that you've discovered a new dog, and maybe you plan to make it your pet, considering you know how to tame a wild dog. Then the person who first discovered the species of dogs comes to you and says that your discovery is invalid because you didn't get permission to discover a new dog. The first discoverer then revokes your newly discovered dog and doesn't pay you a cent. Maybe this example isn't relatable enough, but I think you can understand the problem with the idea of a closed species. People who simply create a character with certain attributes of a closed species will automatically get the assumption by others that they are attempting to create something from the closed species without permission, when that's almost never the case. That's why a closed species should have very defining attributes to them, along with several other smaller attributes that can maybe be customized. When you see a horse, you almost always know it's a horse and not a dog or some other animal. When you see a bird, you automatically know it's a bird. When you see a squirrel, you automatically know it's a squirrel. Why are you able to distinguish these animals easily? Because they each have defining attributes. Horses are typically large with long faces and 4 hooves. Birds range in size with large wings and 2 clawed feet. Squirrels are typically small with large bushy tails that can sometimes be larger than their bodies. That's what a closed species is required to have in order for its concept to be generally acceptable. Simply having a dog with antlers or hooves doesn't make it a new creative species. Think of new concepts that can make a creature unique. Maybe something that doesn't exist in our real world. For example, Vexitites have 2 big retractable claws that come out from its body. It can use this benefit for attacking or capturing prey a lot easier, and can maybe be used to threaten other creatures with, or used for climbing up rough surfaces. A dog with a body made out of water isn't special by any means. It's a dog with a body made of water. Anyone can make a dog with a water pattern. It's not unique or special. It's just a dog, a real-life species that literally anyone can make a character of freely. Mother Nature won't tell you to take the character down for copying the species. Something like a jabberbeast is an example of a well-thought-out closed species. There are 2 types of them, one being a little more defensive looking and another less so. They clearly have anatomy that could serve well in the wild. Obviously the concept of jelly is a creative liberty, which is usually expected in a made-up species. They seem to have a good balance in their body, they look like they could run pretty fast, and they probably have plenty of defense mechanisms against predators. Their defining attribute mainly seems to be their long neck with the longer, shorter face, as well as their leg shape. A creature like this could acceptably be a closed species, as it pretty much checks all the boxes. It doesn't even require a lot of thought. Coming up with ways to make a creature able to survive can just stem from creative liberties and certain design choices. For example, I originally thought of the larger claws as some kind of cool appearance thing, until I later found out that it could actually be used to the creature's advantage. A creative liberty, like the creature being partially made of jelly, can help it move faster, as it may be more lightweight. It also allows for some great creative opportunities to make a neat-looking character. If you have a unique feature that you think might not have a benefit or allow creative freedom of the species, try to include one, as it may check more boxes for a closed species. If you're going to make a closed species, don't make the rules incredibly strict. Let people create characters however they want, as long as they keep the basic species' attributes. Don't take people's characters or make them permanently invalid because they didn't follow the rules for making a character. Just tell them to correct the mistakes and they can resubmit for validation. If someone breaks the rules consistently, then you're alright to block or ban them. But for the love of God, do not make a public blacklist. It's so incredibly degrading for people who have made a few mistakes, whether intentionally calculated or not. In a big species, this is a huge chance for blacklisted people to get harassed by the members of a species. You can try to tell people not to do it, but some people out there will still do it anyway, despite what you say. Just avoid it altogether. This has been MC's re-review of closed species. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned a thing or two. My next video will either be another tutorial, critique, or another complaint that won't fully be related to art this time. See you when I see you.